So my job basically involves investigating bad stuff on social media, everything from disinformation and conspiracy theories to hate, algorithms and polarization, and exposing their real world impact. And I do that across a range of different formats. I think that for me, there are two questions I always ask myself when I'm deciding what to investigate, particularly in terms of disinformation. The first is how viral the content has become. How many people is it reaching? Is it worthy of me investigating it, or do I risk amplifying it to more people? And the second question, perhaps for me the most important question, is what is its real world impact and what harm is it having?
One of the challenges around journalists investigating and fact-checking kind of the information environment around us is that the truth is, I think a lot of newsrooms are still trying to keep up with the skills and the approaches that are needed to investigate information out there. We have a vastly different media environment than we did 10, especially 20 years ago, and certainly earlier than that. There are fewer and fewer journalists on the job, so there's less people to kind of be that check and balance.
There are three things that concern me as a fact checker and someone in the verification space. First is the rise of audio deepfakes. They're increasingly more sophisticated and believable, and it's increasingly difficult to identify without a doubt whether or not this is a deepfake, an audio deepfake specifically in that case. Also, what concerns me is just like around 10 years ago, just under 10 years ago, there would be this is fake news, or you can't believe that news. That kind of entered our lexicon. And one fear I do have, or one concern that we are monitoring, is how blaming information that is true on being deepfake or AI is sowing distrust in information that might be genuine. And lastly, another concern is just for people who are absorbing, the public, and hoping that media literacy is increasingly in the back of the mind.
One of the probably most effective, interventions around this issue is unfortunately one of the hardest, which is to really recapitalize journalism, especially local news, to create voices that people can trust in their communities and help them discern what's real, what's not. Unfortunately, the tech ecosystem has also created a market dynamic where journalism is struggling.
We've trained thousands of journalists over the years, many of whom are now forming the open source investigation teams set up at places like the BBC or CNN or the Financial Times. So for us, it's really about making sure that those journalists are trained to do that themselves, rather than trying to centralize everything around the work of Bellingcat. It's very hard to find the truth. And if you're someone, especially who is trying to take a neutral position on a topic where you have that happening, you end up getting attacked from both sides. So it really pushes out the kind of middle of the discussion. And so you end up with online discussions that are really dominated by the loudest and angriest voices. And that for me is something that's really concerning. It's certainly gotten worse over the last 6 months.
And whether it's the COVID-19 pandemic or whether it is around wars that are unfolding right now in Gaza, the war in Ukraine, different kind of, whenever anything happens, any kind of terror attack or attack, after any of those events, there is this wave of disinformation and hate. And it often has really serious consequences, not just for us trying to figure out what's actually happening, but for the people who are caught up in this, often who are living through the most difficult things and just trying to make sense of that. And I quite recently investigated how the mayor of London had an AI-generated piece of audio that was used to target him. It was faking his voice, suggesting he was going to move the Armistice Day celebrations we have to commemorate people who've died during wars, that he was going to move those to accommodate a pro-Palestinian protest. And it purported to be a secret recording, and it did sound quite a lot like him. And so you can understand why people, perhaps when it played into their biases and they then not very keen on the mayor, or they were shocked by the audio, started to share it. And it spread like wildfire in particular groups, and actually seemed to contribute to tensions offline when there were kind of various confrontations between the police and counter protesters who were very angry about a pro-Palestinian rally and extra angry about this audio.
They often kind of target the fault lines in society or in a particular country. And so certainly over time, we've seen evolution of the tactics for misinformation and disinformation, how easy it is to run fake accounts on social media and spread lies and misinformation. But at the core of it, a lot of times it's about getting into people's heads, appealing to their emotion, appealing to pre-existing beliefs, and trying to hit them with narratives that create a sense of division or in a way trick them into doing something they might not otherwise do. Elections are really almost in some ways kind of the Super Bowl for mis and disinformation. Elections are a time when the stakes are really high.
And in the US context, one of the more famous examples is the fact that ahead of the primaries, there was what was called a Biden robocall. And by this robocall was that there was someone who sounded like Biden, it was AI generated, and that was disseminated through these robocalls to discourage people from voting in the primaries.
Humanity exists in a stew of lies and nonsense. I mean, that's been the case for the vast majority of the existence of the species. But now we've created technologies that essentially play to the worst identity dynamics, the worst political dynamics. And unfortunately, I think that may have a bad effect on democracy.